Okay, let's get things kicked off here, if that's all right with everybody. So again, thank you so much for tuning in to our NovaGraz webinar this afternoon. Again, very thankful and grateful that you selected to spend the next hour or so with us here with Corteva Agriscience Range and Pasture to learn about our newest innovation in our product portfolio to serve cattlemen and women across the country. With that solution and herbicide being NovaGraz. So my name is Morgan Bolander. I am the portfolio marketing lead for the Range and Pasture business at Corteva Agriscience. And the other panelist with me today is my colleague, Sam Ingram, Dr. Sam Ingram, excuse me. He is an integrated field scientist on our team based out of the Carolinas. So I'm tuning in from just outside of Indianapolis, Indiana, and Sam is tuning in from the Carolinas. So again, very thankful for your all's time today and really hope that this is a beneficial hour for you to learn again about a new solution that can hopefully benefit you, maybe your customers, your operations, so on and so forth. So we'll start with a bit of a video, but before we get to that, did just a couple of housekeeping things. So again, we've got about an hour scheduled for this. But throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit questions. And the way that you'll do that is you'll use a Q&A feature. If you could, please don't use the chat feature, but instead use the Q&A. And we've got some time dedicated at the end where we'll answer as many of those questions that we can get to for you all. Any that we can't get answered, we'll follow-ups at the end. But again, we'll please use that Q&A feature throughout, and we will get to those at the end. So with that, let's turn to the video. And we will start with this just to give you a brief overview.
The white clover conundrum ends with NovaGraz herbicide, a breakthrough in pasture management. Legumes and grass pastures improve both animal performance and soil fertility. Plus, spraying grass pastures to control broadleaf weeds can improve forage yields. But until NovaGraz, the better broad-spectrum weed herbicides also killed most legumes. With NovaGraz, white clover and annual espadiza don't have to be sacrificed to control broadleaf weeds in a pasture. Producers can have both. NovaGraz offers a new opportunity for better pastures and improved cattle performance. Let's take a look at the numbers. Approximately 25%. That's the improvement in conception rates possible with cool season grass pastures with white clover. Approximately 50%. That's the increase in stocker gain made possible with white clover in a pasture. Up to 150 pounds per acre. That's the amount of nitrogen white clover can add to the soil. But only one product controls many broadleaf weeds and preserves white clover and annual espadiza. That's new NovaGraz herbicide. Broadleaf weeds in a pasture typically reduce forage production by 1 to 1.5 pounds for each pound of weeds grown over the season, and they may deter cattle from grazing. By eliminating weedy competition in cool season grass pastures with white clover, NovaGraz increases the amount of forage produced and improve utilization. In research trials, NovaGraz herbicide substantially reduced weed pressure, and it did so with minimal impact on white clover populations. With NovaGraz herbicide, bottom line is boosted through lower costs, greater gains, and healthier, better performing cattle. The dollar goes farther as a pasture acre feeds more cattle, or the same number for longer. If broadleaf weeds are limiting forage production and keeping white clover is important, NovaGraz is the solution. Visit rangeandpasture.com/buy the numbers to learn more.
All right, hopefully that gave you a nice overview again of NovaGraz herbicide, what it does and how it can benefit pasture management. So with that, let's dive into and talk a little bit more specifics of this groundbreaking solution. So again, just in review and a summary here of what you just heard, NovaGraz is a groundbreaking weed control solution that enables producers to preserve white clover and annual lespedeza while providing enhanced broadleaf weed control. This allows and means that, again, the benefits of white clover in pastures, whether that's improved forage quality, animal performance benefits, are finally able to be realized. So prior to NovaGraz being a product, there was no product on the market or available that would allow for the preservation of white clover and annual lespedeza, but also take out broadleaf weeds. So before, if you were controlling weeds, also white clover and annual lespedeza was controlled as well. So again, this is quite the game-changing solution for those cattlemen and women that, again, preserving and maintaining white clover and annual lespedeza is important for. Some attributes of NovaGraz, aside from, again, the preservation of white clover and annual lespedeza, is that, again, those are desirable forages that can be maintained, that if mowing were to be done, it would remove those while also offering weed control. So again, the ability to maintain these desirable forages is now a key advantage for operations. And compared to 2,4-D alone, NovaGraz provides a much broader spectrum of control of broadleaf weeds if NovaGraz is the product to use compared to 2,4-D alone, especially maybe a cut rate of 2,4-D. So NovaGraz does have no soil residual activity, and with that means that obviously it's ideal for maybe use in areas where an extended residual is not desired. We have a number of other products in our Corteva range and pasture portfolio that have extended residual or offer extended residual. Again, NovaGraz is not going to be one of those, but this allows for a short plant back interval for pastures, native plantings. So with forage grasses, we're looking at 14 days of a plant back, forage legumes looking at 30 days, and then a 90-day crop rotation, basically to any crop. In terms of a use rate, so 24 fluid ounces per acre is the primary recommended use rate. I think a pretty nice number there. However, there can be, NovaGraz can be applied up to 48 fluid ounces per acre per year for enhanced spectrum, or say you wanted to make more than one application. Again, the label does allow for 48 fluid ounces per acre per year to be applied. Now, with an application, so there is an adjuvant requirement, which that is a methylated seed oil, and more specifically, at a rate of 1% volume per volume of a straight or pure MSO. So we really want to avoid kind of mixes here of adjuvants that maybe are a little bit of MSO and something else. We're really looking for straight or pure MSO in order to help this product perform as intended and to allow for the best results from use. A couple of other notes here is that, again, you've heard us say a few times now already that NovaGraz only preserves white clover and annual lespedeza, not other clover varieties. So with NovaGraz, red clover will, as an example, will not be preserved. So if, again, a goal or intent is to preserve other clover varieties, again, that is, we should not expect that preservation of those other clover varieties with NovaGraz. So NovaGraz should not be used with UltiGraz, pasture weed and feed, or with other treated fertilizations. All right, so a little more about, again, the benefits and really great over the to operations. Again, we that will preserve controlling broadleaf weeds. We can look for improved conception rates by up to 25% by having and maintaining white clover in cool season grass pastures, along with looking for an increase of stalker average gain by up to 50% with the inclusion or maintenance of white clover in pastures. And then also too, we can add up to 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre to the soil with white clover as well. So to learn more about this information or to learn more kind of about, again, the benefits here of NovaGraz, you can visit the bythenumbers.corteva.us. But with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Sam to share a little bit more with you.
Okay, thanks, Morgan. Appreciate that. Able to see my screen, hear me okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Good deal. Well, hey, just want to echo what Morgan was saying. Thank you all for joining today. Thanks for taking the time to learn about this new product that we're going to offer here in 2025. Really excited about it, and I know our team is as well. And, you know, this is a product that a lot of folks have been asking for several years, and we're excited. I know our team that is out there going to be selling it, they're excited about it being on the shelves. So we're going to talk NovaGraz for sure, but to start us off, what I wanted to do is really dive into some of those key points that Morgan was talking to us about with white clover's role in the pastures. So we're going to look at a few things, how white clover improves from an economic standpoint, how white clover improves economic standpoint from the agronomy look at the pasture. We're also going to look at performance, animal performance, both from an average daily gain and a conception rate. So we're going to talk both to the stalker producer and the cow-calf producer. So to dive into it, what we're going to look at is we're going to really take a deep dive into white clover. And before I go too much further, we're focusing in here on white clover and Lespedeza, but I want to mention that this is also a new non-residual herbicide option for producers, whether they be limited on hay movement or crop rotation. They want that flexibility. This is also good for that option too. But what we're going to spend time on this afternoon is white clover and that benefit of having legumes in the pasture. So many of you already know this. This is well established that white clover, it fixates nitrogen. It adds that nitrogen into the soil, and that's a huge benefit for our producers. And, you know, the way that nitrogen gets redistributed across the pasture is from that grazing animal. And in this photo, we have a cow, you know, when she's grazing, removing that leaf matter, it comes back out. She only utilizes a little bit of it to put pounds of beef on, but the rest of it goes back into the soil, and that pasture gets the benefit of it when we do that. When we put numbers to it, so when we think about the economic benefit of white clover in our pastures, you know, if we want to put numbers to what are we saving from a nitrogen standpoint when we have this this specific legume in our pasture situation, what does that look like? So as Morgan mentioned, we have 150 pounds of nitrogen. We can fixate that much nitrogen from those plants per acre per year. So this table below is adapted from Southern Forages. Many of you are familiar with that. It seems like on the call when I was looking at the attendees list. This publication, we pulled that from the table. And to our right-hand side, you can see just that simple equation. I shot for the middle. Say we are fixing 100 pounds of nitrogen per year with that white clover addition into our pasture situation. Now, depending on where you're shopping at and where you get your nitrogen source from, the price per pound can differ. So you can walk through that the table below and see that. But I just did for easy math. Let's say nitrogen is going to cost 60 cents a pound per unit of N. Time that times 100 pounds, that's $60 an acre that we're saving. We're putting back into the pocket of the producer, and they can utilize that nitrogen. They're not going to have to bring in other inputs from a nitrogen standpoint. So that's a big benefit from the economic side of it. When we look at the agronomic performance, when we compare clover to grass, the predominant stand is going to be a grass, whether warm season grasses. When we look at white clovers and legumes in general, you can kind of clump these into the two of the same. Specific to white clover, we have higher crude protein, 25%. So that's in an excess for sure. For any type of whether we're talking cow-calf, whether we're talking growing stock or cattle, 25%, we're doing a good job. That's going to meet the demands for not only maintenance of that animal, but actually growing that animal. On the other side of that too, we have digestibility. So not only, we've got good crude protein, but is the forage itself digestible? White clover is very digestible, 80%. So what that does is that stimulates intake for those animals. So they're not only getting a highly nutritious forage, but they're also able to intake more. So that stimulates that intake. And that's where we see those strong performances there. When we look at our mineral contents, we have higher calcium, phosphorus, magnesium comparatively to some of those grasses, and all of those are important when we start talking about nutrition in general for a lot of these animals. The benefits on the agronomic side for white clover. Now moving over to performance. So over these next few slides, we're going to look at some performance data that relates to not only our stocker cattle, but also cow-calf operations, because across the board, the addition of these clover types, with this one specifically, the Ladino white clover, we're going to get improvement on animal performance. So when this study took place, this is some older data from Carl Hovland when he was at Alabama. So this is on toxic tall fescue plus white clover and then toxic tall fescue alone. So over the course of the study, you can see from an average daily gain standpoint, so from that individual animal performance, we increased 44% on an ADG. If you look at that, we had a half pound gain with those stocker cattle when we added in the Ladino clover over just fescue alone. When you move it to a total pounds gained on that acre, so how productive is that 1 acre of ground? We know with cattle markets the way they are this year, we want to maximize profits. And going into 2025 as well, we want to maximize our efficiency, maximize pounds of beef produced on that acre. That translates here too. When we have the addition of white clover in a tall fescue system, in this case, we had a 55% bump, over 200 pounds per acre. When you start putting numbers to that, the addition of white clover makes sense a lot of times to a lot of producers when you start looking at the performance, the added performance here, not only from an individual animal performance data, but pounds of beef produced across that acre. Okay, so if we're talking about animal performance, we can talk stock or cattle, but also for the cow-calf operator, this focuses in here on a toxic tall fescue system. But I will say, across the board, when we're adding in those changes might be more pronounced with a toxic tall fescue system, which predominantly in the tall fescue belt, that is what it is. Even if we had novel endophyte tall fescue, when we add in clover, we're going to see an improvement across the board with animal performance and animal health, cow-calf producers. In general, when we're talking about mitigation strategies, tall fescue, one of the strategies people do is dilution of the pasture with adding in white clovers. That has helped overall with fescue toxicosis. to dive deeper into that, when we talk about specific to the cow-calf producer, what does that do for those mama cows that they're trying to carry, trying to get bred back, trying to have calf drop, annual calf drop, and eventually selling the calf crop? What we can look at is when we add in white clover, we're going to improve our body condition, which in turn improves conception rates. So for a cow-calf producer, obviously, if she's not getting bred back, she's costing us money. So conception rates are huge. When we have a higher nutritional makeup within the pasture, we're going to improve that body condition score. We're going to move over to higher conception rates. We're going to tighten up on our conception, on our window, on our calving window too. We're going to have a more uniform calf crop. So that's going to benefit us too if we're actually selling video lots or full loads. But if we focus back in on that mama cow, what's going to help her, we've got the calf on the ground. We've done our job there. She is successfully calved, but now we want her to have high weaning weights. Well, how does she do that? She has good milking ability. And when we have high nutritional planes with the incorporation of white clover, we get higher milking, which in turn leads to higher weaning weights, which in turn leads to better profitability for that cow-calf producer. Now, if we step back and look at this table, so this is an adaptation from Gary Lacefield and Ray up at University of Kentucky, in Illinois, Indiana. And what they saw there, when we talk about just the importance of getting that mama cow bred back so she can carry a calf and actually make us some money instead of costing money. In the Illinois study, tall fescue versus tall fescue plus clover, these were tall fescue pastures. They saw a 14 percentage point bump in conception rate. So on our right-hand side here, top right, just doing simple math again, we're going to go with 100 cows. If we go from 75% to 89%, obviously that carries us over from having 75 calves successfully dropped on the ground to 89. A difference of 14 calves for a producer is not a small thing, especially with the market that we have now. 14 4- or 5-weight calves that they're weaning off and selling in the market. That's a big chunk of what their profit could be, for sure. So it makes sense there, the benefits from an animal performance standpoint, and this really relates back to the economics too. All right, so let's talk about the weed portion of it. We're going to dive more into NovaGraz. Hopefully I teed that up enough for folks to have interest in white clover if you don't already have it in your pastures, if it makes sense for where you're at in the region. Hopefully you're going to be interested in putting it in there. Let's talk about, all right, well, we've got the white clover, we're in there, but now we have some broadleaf pressure that's coming in. Really the benefit of those white clover, all the things we just talked about from an economic standpoint, agronomic standpoint, animal performance, those systems where we have majority makeup are a selected forage grass species intermingled traditionally with a white clover species, and those are the two predominant species in the pasture. When we start bringing in broadleaf weed pressure, we start losing some of those benefits for sure. When we start bringing in broadleaf weed pressure, we don't see those things. So some of the studies that we've done internally and externally, you can find some of these data points where there's a range anywhere from a reduction of 1 to 1.5 pounds of forage can be removed for every 1 pound of weed out there in the pasture. So that's a big selling point there, just to as far as broadleaf weed pressure, because what we want to do is we want to capitalize. We want those animals to harvest what we've spent money on planting for those improved both white clover varieties in this case, but also the improved grass varieties, whether it be cool season or warm season. They've been selected for yield, for vigor, for disease pressure, and when things like broadleaf weeds invade, they minimize those where we don't actually see the benefits of them. In addition to that, we do see things with, or not things, we see weeds, plants with sharp thorns, awns, and spines. Think about biennial thistles. spiny pigweed to a certain extent, get into some mixed brush with blackberry, where animals will totally avoid grazing those areas. And then we can start seeing manipulation of the pasture where we see hot spots, overgrazing, and we can get to issues there too. All that to say, when we remove that broadleaf weed pressure, we have more uniformity throughout the pasture, and we maximize what we really want to with the improved varieties and grasses and white clover in this case. All right, so diving into the numbers here and how we'll look at some applications of NovaGraz and what that response looks like from white clover. This is what we'll look at from a weed standpoint. So on our left-hand side, that chart shows you broadleaf weed presence. NovaGraz is in our green. The untreated plots are in our gray. So as you set these up, this is just a percent frequency, how we visually assessed it across the plot. So 30 DAT would be 30 days after treatment. And you can see, so 30 days after an application of NovaGraz at 24 fluid ounces plus 1% MSO volume per volume, broadleaf weed presence was reduced from 40%, that's in our untreated, down to 11%. Okay, then take it out to 60 days. You can see as that continues out, we maintain a good control or reduction in broadleaf weed presence in relation to the control. 33 and 8 at 60, 35 and 6 at 90. We do a good job there compared to the control. Now look over on our right-hand side. This is the frequency or percentage, visual percentage of white clover presence at those same treatment dates. So what does that look like from a standpoint of what does white clover do if we didn't make this application? What would the presence look like in the field? So at 30 days, we see 51% of the white clover still present within the treated plots, and in the untreated, we're about 56%. So half of that stand in the untreated was made up of was white clover. We had a slight reduction, 5% there. Move it out to 60, a little more dramatic. We take down to 10 percentage points. So that would be where we start the tolerance white clover. Then moving into 90, we're back up into the 60 and 70%. Clovers is actually in response to herbicide where we were 30 and 60 days before. Okay, so again, as Morgan pointed out, the only offering for broad spectrum weed control that preserves white clover and annual Lespedeza. So this is just a pull out from our label, and we can talk specifics offline or here in the chat if we've got time. But just some of the things that we thought producers would be interested in knowing: does NovaGraz have a good spectrum of control for some of the weeds we see commonly across the pasture? So fleabane, annual marsh elder, the buttercup species do a good job there. Cockleburr for sure, ragweed species, mare's tail, ironweed species, biennial thistles, all including there. We call it here bull thistle, musk thistle, plumeless. We do a good job when we get on those at the right time. And then when we think about NovaGraz specifically with the Rinscore component in there, the plantain species, they're very sensitive to that. So NovaGraz does a great job with any of the plantain species. Weeds in the carrot family, we're going to do a great job there too. So poison hemlock, wild parsnip, chicory, wild carrot, we're doing a good, we have a wide spectrum, broad spectrum of control there. Just some of the ones we wanted to call out, not the whole entire list that we pulled out from the label. Again, we can talk about some of those specific ones, weed pressure you all see out in the pasture, and if NovaGraz fits there. But broad spectrum weed control, still preserving white clover. All right, now moving over to know what to expect after an application. So we want to make sure producers are aware. You know, I saw a lot of county agents in the chat here too. You know, I want you to make sure that you are aware of what producers can expect when we make this application, because we do say we are preserving white clover. We're still going to have that white clover present in the pastures, but we are going to experience some symptomology. We're going to have some leaf yellowing. We're going to have a little bit of lodging occurring. And to set it up as a timeline, we're going to walk through some photos here. But around 2 weeks post-application, expect symptomology from that white clover. You know, the other thing is expect symptomology on that broadleaf weed pressure. So we're going to start seeing good control on our broadleafs that we went out and made an application to. Obviously, that white clover's metabolizing that herbicide too. So at that point, go out there expecting symptomology, but know that we're going to have recovery. We're going to have the benefit of controlling those weeds that we went out to control in the first place. Around 4 to 5 weeks post-application, expect recovery to happen there. It's a progression over time, but once we get to that point, you know, we've got good recovery with that white clover. So the photos we'll look at I'll let you know up front, they're pure stands of white clover, so we'll take a look at that and see what can be. But as I think about this product going out across several, thousands of acres, the majority of the stands are going to be mixed stands, grass and white clover mixed stands there in the pastures. So some of the things we can do to minimize those short-term effects are grazing those stands prior to application. So when we know we're going to be going after certain weeds, if we have animals in that pasture, in that paddock, if we're able to graze both the grasses and the white clover in this case, remove some of that leaf area, then we're going to improve our timeline on recovery, because we're just reducing the contact, the leaf area that comes into contact with that herbicide. Okay, following up after we make that application, moderate grazing after it can help reduce that grass competitiveness. Now, a lot of the white clovers that we see out there on the market in the pastures, these improved varieties, they are very good, very high yielding, pretty aggressive. They can compete well with, say, in a tall fescue system with tall fescue. But if we want to also help that white clover respond, get up and come back from recovery, moderate grazing application help remove some of that leaf area on the grass to open up the canopy to let the white clover come back too. And as mentioned by Morgan, we're not going to couple this with Ulti-Graze or any fertilizer applications, nitrogen fertilizer, because when we do that with a legume specifically, we remove the legume's competitive advantages to grasses. It can fixate grass, nitrogen, in some other way. We're not going to do that because we cover the advantages. And hopefully from agronomic performance and animal performance, have a good understanding. Really want to maximize that white clover presence because it's going to help us. Okay, so variety specific, and we've had some questions come in on other species, crimson clover. We'll talk about red clover too, but focusing in on white clover again, this is just for white clover and annual Espadiza. But within white clovers, you have small, intermediate, and large type white clovers. And in general, this little graph on the bottom side, we have tolerance across the board, but as you move toward more tolerant, you're going to be more into the intermediate white clover types that have been developed out there for yield and vigor. So, name your seed dealer of choice, ask them about what options they have as far as white clover and intermediate types, then that would be where we go for most tolerant types. Not to say small and large aren't there, it's just the intermediate types are definitely more tolerant from what we've seen. Okay, looking at some photos here. Again, this is white clover response after an application of NovaGraz at 24 ounces. plus 1% MSO volume per volume. So on a very far left-hand side, that's day 0 or day 1 of application. We move out to 1 week. We start seeing some of that lodging, some of that chlorosis or yellowing of the white clover leaves. Again, this is in a pure state of white clover, so this is much more pronounced than you would see in see the same symptomology in a mixed stand of cool season grasses and white clover, but this one, there's a lot more dramatic effect when it's this pure stand. Moving over to 2 weeks, I would say that would be our low point. So we have lodging here compared to our untreated checks, which are on the side there. You can see that white clover on the side. We've got lodging, we've got laying over. There is some chlorosis there. We've knocked the blooms off the white clover. So that 2 week mark is that's our low point as far as symptomology. Then we move into that recovery phase. At 3 weeks, we can see the recovery happening. We can see the green clover bouncing back up. We can see leaf matter coming back. Chlorosis is still there, still a little bit of lodging. Moving into 4 weeks after application, blooms start coming back with these intermediate types, large and small too. We start coming back, we start getting some blooms back there. The lodging kind of decreases. And then at 5 weeks after application, white clover's recovered and we're flowering. Okay, so again, just to hit on these points, best practices to minimize those short-term effects, raising those stands prior to application to reduce leaf area that comes into contact with that white clover. If we're out there, if we have cattle in that pasture, we're able to graze for application to reduce the grass pressure. That will be great. Just to open up the canopy to let that white clover have a full recovery. And again, we're going to avoid nitrogen fertilization because we don't want to tip the scales to the advantage of the grasses. So just to hit this point one more time, without effective broadleaf weed control, those weeds can harm our floral forage. In this case now, for the first, both grasses, white clover, and annual Lespedeza. So the benefit, if we want to maximize the benefit of those legumes, the ones we've talked about across the board, we need to set out a goal, set out that strategy of controlling those broadleaves. And NovaGraz is going to allow us to do that. All right. One other thing, how this compares broad spectrum to, say, a 2,4-D alone application. So we have 2,4-D plus Rinskor. We have that broad spectrum control across the board. And when I think about NovaGraz and how we're really going to tip the scales here with certain weeds that we're doing a great job of controlling, in addition to across the board, we're broad spectrum on a lot of these weeds. But the plantain species, carrots, wild chickpea, ironweed do a great job there too. So expanding that spectrum of control with NovaGraz in comparison to 2,4-D alone. All right, some other things to just talk about best management practices. We're going to walk through some of these. Application timing. This is a non-residual herbicide. So to be most effective, we want to target those weeds when they're coming up. We're going to have around 90% germination of those. We want them to be actively growing because these are 2 group 4 herbicides. So they are growth regulators. We want an actively growing plant to be good at controlling those. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about application window. Non-residual herbicide, we want the majority of our weed population to have germinated when we make this application. The specifics to cool season weeds, such as our biennial thistles, that includes the musk thistle listed here, bull thistle, plumeless, or our buttercup species. Those applications would be early, mid-spring, or potentially late in the fall. If we get some warm days, make an application, get good control. Warm season weed species such as pigweed, cockleburr, ironweed species. That would be moving more into the late spring to early summer. All right, use rates. Again, Morgan talked about this, but there's nothing wrong with repetition, especially with a new product. So primary use rate for NovaGraz is going to be 24 fluid ounces per acre. That's going to be where we focus in on suggested use rate. That's going to get us good coverage across the board. Now we do have the option for a maximum single use rate of 48 ounces, but our maximum use rate per year on that acre is 48. So if we go to 48, we don't have the option of doing another application. So at 24, we're broad spectrum. We do a good job on control. But if we needed to do that 48, we have that option. Now, be also those plants in terms of the weeds that we're going after. So we're setting that, 15 gallons. That's across the board when we're talking about making applications in pastures and hayfields. We want to be at 15 just for good coverage. All right, Morgan also talked about this, but adjuvants, MSO is the only adjuvant that should be used there. So to ensure that good, consistent control, to make sure that we're capitalizing on, the investment that we have here in this broadleaf weed application, MSO is needed. MSO is what we recommend. So don't substitute with the organosilicones, the NISs, or the blends. That's going to be the best use there on adjuvants. Some other BMPs, I don't see this happening, but in a hay situation, potentially want to delay harvesting forages for at least 14 days. We need enough time for that product to get into the broadleaf weeds that we're hoping to control, and then actually do what it's intended to do. We don't want to waste an application before that. So then again, omit nitrogen fertilizer from our legume pastures. Now on the other side, you'll see it as if you dive into the label, we do have the instructions on mixing with fertilizer. That is because, again, I mentioned NovaGraz can be utilized as a non-residual option. So for folks outside of legumes, white clover and annual Lespedeza, if they just want this new non-residual option, then they have that ability there, and you do have the ability to mix with fertilizers. But when we're focusing in on preserving white clovers, preserving annual Lespedeza, we don't want to have nitrogen in that tank. Okay, one thing that we definitely want to hit on here, and I would encourage you, if you are a county agent or you're an advisor out there, retailers as well, make sure we know what clover we have out there in those pastures. Know what they have out there. Red clover varieties are definitely more sensitive to NovaGraz herbicide than white clover or Lespedeza. That's why you don't see us recommending applications on red clover. It may end up killing that red clover out there, and that would cause some heartburn. So we got to know which type of clover we have out there. And if they're uncertain, work with our forage specialists across the states, work with our range and pasture specialists across the U.S. They can help us and help the producers ID what type of clover we have out there and make sure NovaGraz is the right one application for them. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to Morgan to do a recap. But if you have more questions about this, we're gonna stay on and do a Q&A. But hopefully, that we have range of specialists across the U.S. that, like I said, are excited to launch this new product out there. They're knowledgeable about it. Reach out to them. Reach out to your retailer who likely has a relationship with that range and pasture specialist. If you want more information on those details, I'll reach out to those folks. You can also rangeandpasture.com to look for that product label NovaGraz and get a lot more information on it. So Morgan, with that, I will turn back over to you for a recap. You're still on mute, Morgan.
You think I would know better by now, right? After all these years of post-COVID web meetings, I should know better. Thank you, Sam, for letting me know that. So I wasn't talking into thin air. All right, so yeah, thank you so much, Sam, for just the in-depth recap there and information on NovaGraz, the role of white clover in pastures, the importance, the value, and again, how we can use and how best to use NovaGraz in order to maintain that where that's desired by producers. So, um, just a couple of notes here before we go into Q&A. So NovaGraz will be available for the 2025 season. That's just around the corner here. And as US EPA did register NovaGraz last month, and we have since been pursuing state registrations. And you can see a list of states here in alphabetical order. There are about 20 of them that have already granted state registration for NovaGraz in these states. So we fully anticipate that this list will continue to grow the rest of the calendar year as well as into early 2025. Again, to where NovaGraz will be available or should be available in pretty much all states for the 2025 season. So again, wanted to be sure to share this information. Product is not yet available to be shipped or sent to these states, but again, it will be in plenty of time for the 2025 season. So with that, let's maybe go to questions, Laura, if that works for you.
Sam, we have lots of questions for you and Sam. We will try to get to them all, guys. Any that we don't get to, please know that we will answer you. The webinar gives us a place where we can answer you directly, but I'm going to jump right in. You guys can thumb wrestle over this one. Any pasture restrictions on grazing? Sam, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, got a little bit of a lag here. So no, across the no grazing restrictions. Minus we have a 3 day right for dairy cattle. Yeah, for lactating dairy cattle. But other than that, no grazing restrictions. Animals can be out in pasture when we make these applications. So from a logistics standpoint, that's a big one for our producers. No worry there.
Either one of you, does this work for dog fennel or horse nettle and bull nettle?
Good question. We would not recommend NovaGraz for dog fennel or horse nettle, bull nettle, those species. I will say we have good product offerings for both of those. And I would point you back to our range and pasture specialists to work with them on that. That's a conversation you'd have to have with that producer is how much is your clover worth if we're overrun with horse nettle, we're overrun with dog fennel. If we make an application with, say, Pasture Guard HL to control the dog fennel, what does our clover response look like there? And then with a horse nettle, we really need a residual product. So that's a site-specific conversation they need to have with their producer. And we might look into renovation or bringing white clover back into that system a few years down the road after we get dog fennel under control, horse nettle under control.
Thank you, Sam. Is the 2,4-D the choline formulation?
No, we're not the choline formulation. No.
Are other legumes intolerant, or are there levels of tolerance seen in the use of NovaGraz, or is it just white clover in Lespedeza?
So again, white clover, annual Lespedeza, that's what we have confidence in as far as tolerance to NovaGraz herbicide. And that's why we stick with a recommendation of just white clover and just annual Lespedeza. Now, in some of our trial work, we've had other legumes in those trials, but we don't either have the data, in a robust data package where we have that confidence in them, or we've seen injury where we just don't want to go down that road. So we're sticking to white clover and annual Espadiza.
I answered this question, but I got it a couple times, so I thought maybe you guys could answer it as well. Is this a restricted use herbicide? Does it require a permit?
No, this is not a restricted use herbicide. So that's a good point. So we don't need a license. We don't need the education standpoint from some of those restricted use herbicides. With NovaGraz, you can have peace of mind for a good non-residual herbicide that gives you flexibility on crop rotation, gives you that flexibility on if we wanted to move from a pasture situation to say a different type of crop, we've got that there. It's at 90 days. Forage legumes, 14 days. Forage grasses, 30 days.
There was some pretty technical questions, Sam, that you may want to answer one-on-one. I'll ask a couple here. You can just tell them you'll get back to them one-on-one. But does the clover add nitrogen back into the soil over the entire growing period? Or is there a specific time that the clover maximizes nitrogen production for the soil?
Yeah, that's a good question. I saw that from Steve Morgan. That's a good question, Steve. So as you think about how that nitrogen gets back into the soil, what I would say is with that cool season, when we have a big bump in the spring, typically, thinking about the southeast, and Steve, I think that's where you're at in Georgia. That's when we have maximized growing conditions, maximized yield. So when that animal harvests it, we're returning that nitrogen back into the soil from the animal. They only utilize a certain portion of it, then the rest of it gets returned back to the pasture. So that's when we're going to really peak is there. But I would imagine those roots with exudates coming off, dying roots, so sloughing off roots, and then leaf matter that falls off of that plant, we're going to get a little bit of nitrogen coming across the whole entire year from that plant.
This producer would like to know how long he should wait after planting white clover before using NovaGraz.
That's a really good question. And what I would say, broad brush strokes here would be when the crown of the clover is developing multiple trifoliates. So that is more of where is that plant at, and it's not a true timeline because the timelines can be different depending on where you're at and what kind of rainfall we've got and what kind of growing degree days we've had since planting. But when that crown starts developing multiple trifoliates, we know we've got a good root system. We know we've got a plant that could withstand a herbicide application.
I think we have time for maybe a couple more. With no residual activity, have any studies been done using see and spray type technology, or has it all just been full broadcast?
So in our studies, when we've done work both with university, and I will say, I've seen a lot of folks here that are county agents and specialists. A lot of that work's done with our university people too to get this product to where it's at. So we appreciate them in cooperation with us. But our trials have just been broadcast applications.
This gentleman also has a non-cow question, but is curious. Could white clover be a good feed patch for his white-tailed deer?
Yeah,
I threw that at you,
absolutely.
Sam, just because I know you personally would know the answer.
Yeah, so deer are ruminants just like our cattle are, and they benefit from high levels of nutrition. And you can carry that over to the doe as far as conception rates and improving her as far as putting fawns on the ground. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Yes, it's a good option. It is a good option for a food plot if the land manager wanted to add that in.
I was very worried about getting you on hunting, so I was nervous about asking that one. What percentage by dry matter of white clover in a pasture Will you need to produce that 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre?
Oh, that's a
I
really
thought,
good question. Well, if you carry out, if you say, 20% of it's crude protein, and then crude protein is just nitrogen, you could carry it out from that formula of nitrogen times, what is it, 6.25. You can calculate that pretty easy. That might be all an offline question we can talk about. What are we looking at when we see this amount of standing forage in clover? What do we need to produce conservatively 50 units of nitrogen?
I will mark that one for you, Sam. There's several we'll go after this. Guys, and there's a lot more questions, but the computer will cut us off in a minute and a half. So I wanted to give Morgan and Sam just a minute and a half to wrap us up. But please know all your questions will be addressed after this. We should have kept the computer a little bit longer.
Yeah, no, we seriously, again, appreciate you being here, spending the last hour with us, your engagement, listening and whatnot, asking questions, submitting questions throughout. So yeah, hopefully that little Q&A session there was helpful and got a lot of those answered. But again, if there's some more, we'll be sure to circle back on those. But again, thank you so much for again tuning in today. Hope that this was a beneficial hour for you as again we shared and talked about NovaGraz herbicide, the only herbicide that will preserve white clover and annual lespedeza while controlling broadleaf weeds. And hope that again this was helpful to help you understand how it can be applicable and helpful to your own operations, those of producers you work with, so on and so forth. So we wish you well, and again appreciate your support and you tuning in with us here at Corteva today. So happy holidays to you. Take care.